What a headshot! What a head!
How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you guys through a differential draft that could raise a few eyebrows. Now I want to pop a quick definition of a differential here because I know not everyone has been playing FPL for seasons on seasons. So differential, it's in the name, it's a different player, different being, kind of different to the template. So there are a couple of thresholds. Different people think of a differential in different ways, but the most kind of sensible way is in terms of ownership, especially going to game week 1. So I've seen differential threads over on Twitter for 10% owned, 5% owned. I'll be kind of going for the 15 below. So if a player was selected by 15% or less, I'm considering them to be a differential, and therefore they could be in this video. Now there's a big question mark about should you guys be choosing differentials in game week 1. That's a debate that a lot of people have going into the new seasons. My kind of take on it is that I would go for the players that you guys think are going to score the most points. If that's a differential, if that's a 5% owned player, 100% go for them, but I wouldn't just choose a player because they're lowly owned. We can do that at the end of the season when we're looking at kind of taking punts, taking risks, then 100% fine, but game week 1's not the time to do that. But still, at the end of the day, if the player bangs and they're lowly owned, you're going to rise the ranks even more. So the main purpose of this video is to maybe highlight options that are lowly owned that might be going under the radar that you guys could select. Now post your guys' favorite differentials down in the comments below. Don't worry, I'm on one of the big channels. I don't have many subscribers, many views, so just by posting the name in the comments won't raise their ownership that much. But if you guys are looking forward to seeing my differentials, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So going on to the actual differential draft, and we've gone back to the old draft layout, the starting 15, and this was just because I could afford every single option that I wanted. You guys will see top right hand side, 3.5 million in the bank. Now I know that you guys won't be choosing this draft. I guess you guys can, but no one is probably going with the starting 15 into game week 1. The draft is simply kind of a format. But I guess if you guys did want to choose this draft, you have 3.5 in the bank, so some upgrades can be made if you want to do it. Now I'll be going through position by position. The goalkeepers are slightly different to the other options, as the defenders, midfielders and forwards are rated from highest owned to lowest owned. Now in each position I'll be going over some alternatives that I could potentially have gone for, but I didn't really want to go for them either because of fixtures or maybe I just didn't think they're that great. The best example of this is in terms of the goalkeepers. I can only highlight kind of 2 differentials, but in terms of FPL this season there's kind of a few highly owned options such as a Ramsdale, and besides that quite low ownership in terms of the goalkeepers. But the 2 I've decided to select are going to be Steele and Johnston. Now in terms of Steele, Robert Sanchez also has a similar kind of ownership. Then the new goalkeeper also has about a 1%, 2% ownership. So accumulating all those ownerships kind of brings you to 12%. So why I'm saying this is that behind the scenes of Steele, there's Robert Sanchez with about the same ownership as I mentioned. And if he's going to leave the club, all that ownership is probably going to come to Steele. So I wouldn't take that kind of 5.6 ownership at face value, consider it more to be our 10%. Then in terms of Johnston, I really like him as a 1.1% owned goalkeeper. He is the number 1 I think at Crystal Palace instead of Guaita, and Crystal Palace had a very good XG conceded last season. Now there's a lot of other 4.5s that I was considering. Dean Henderson, if he signs to Nottingham Forest, could be a great option, has the best points per 90 minutes as mentioned in the overpriced goalkeepers. And at 4.5 you guys can't really go wrong with any of these. But my personal favorites are going to be Steele and Johnston. I think at their price point, great value for money, and I think they're a lot better than a Pickford who had a higher ownership. So comment down below what goalkeeper do you guys have in your current draft and what's their ownership looking like. Now let's move on to the defensive department, and in terms of my Liverpool assets, the only option that was actually underpriced from that Liverpool defense is Virgil van Dijk, and he's 8.5% owned. Now would I pick Van Dijk in my draft? Probably not. Liverpool fixtures, especially the opening 4, aren't looking that strong, but at least Virgil van Dijk offers some attacking threat off those set pieces. Now in my opinion, I'm a Liverpool fan. I think we're going to be a lot better defensively this season, so the clean sheet should hopefully flow back in. But what I would say, if you guys have a couple of millions left, not going for Trent, want some Liverpool coverage, Virgil's probably the player I would go for. The next up is going to be the Man City assets. Now John Stone's actually quite well owned, I think about 25% last time I checked, but an option that has potential is Nathan Ake at 7.8%. Now he comes in 0.5 cheaper than a John Stones, and last season Pep was choosing him a lot. So let's see how the preseason goes. If Ake is featuring in the lineups quite a lot, I really like him at his price point. Then we have Fabian Schär at 5%. Now in terms of what stats you guys use, but in terms of fantasy football fix, Schär was the highest XG defender last season. So it's quite close between him and Gabriel last season, but Fabian Schär loves an attacking return and he's only 5% owned. Now I know that Newcastle have some tough fixtures to start off the season with, but what you guys can do is if you have a 4.5 on the bench, I would suggest Pau Torres. He actually rotates with Fabian Schär quite nicely, and then you can miss game week 2 and 3 from Newcastle. So nice little rotation pair, as I mentioned, Fabian Schär and Pau Torres. And even if he doesn't get a clean sheet, Fabian Schär offers that attacking threat. Alternative to a Kieran Trippier at a cheaper price point, so maybe look at him. We're then going to move on to our Chelsea assets, and there's always kind of a differential Chelsea defender. This season it's Ben Chilwell, as Reece James is owned by quite a few more. So just under 5% for Ben Chilwell, and I actually do like him. I know that Reece James might get better stats at the end of the day, but Ben Chilwell is not too shabby, and depending on how kind of Pochettino lines up, he could be absolute gold. Now the big question mark obviously is going to be the injury concerns, but same could be said with Reece James. So maybe look at Chilwell if you want an alternative. Then our final defender is going to be 4.3% owned. It's Pedro Porro from Spurs. Now new manager as well, like Chelsea. So all eyes will be on how they set up during preseason. Now I did see in Spurs' last game that he was playing in a back four. Don't you like the back four? Might not get as attacking as in a back five. But let's see what happens throughout the preseason. But in terms of these defenders, there were a few other options that I could have highlighted. But these 5 are my favorite. If I didn't miss any, or you guys have your favorites, comment them down below and share them with the rest of us. Now moving to the midfield department, and I'm going to start off with the more highly owned kind of midfielder. It's going to be Phil Foden at 12.4%. Now Phil Foden was in my first draft, was in my current draft that I'll be releasing tomorrow. So a little bit of spoiler alert there. I just feel like with Mahrez now confirmed to be leaving Man City, Phil Foden might kind of show up that right wing slot, but Bernardo Silva is also there. If you guys have watched my kind of underpriced, overpriced midfielder videos, you know that Phil Foden has a great points per 90 minutes, so he is hoping that he starts most games. I just feel like Man City's fixtures are so strong, so if you guys do want to go for an attacker, besides Erling Haaland, Phil Foden might be the one to go for. Now we're going to go over another Liverpool asset, and it's going to be Luis Diaz at 6.2%. Now the reason I've gone for Diaz over maybe someone like a Jota is just believe that Luis Diaz is one of Klopp's favourites, and when fit, he usually starts at left wing. Actually started their first kind of preseason game, and if he can stay fit, I reckon he'll start the majority of games. Now he is owned by 6.2%, and this will be a wait and see. I want to see throughout the preseason how it kind of goes and how Jurgen Klopp sets up his front three. But it could be a massive differential going to Game Week 1 if you guys do want to take a punt, but as everyone's saying, it's quite hard to predict how Liverpool are going to set up. The next option is Heung-min Son at 6%. Now if I told you that Heung-min Son was going to be owned by 6% a couple of seasons ago, you probably would have said I'm absolutely mad. But unfortunately, after a bad season, not many attacking returns came. He's at a massive price downgrade and is currently owned by less than 6%. Now it has come out in the news that apparently Heung-min Son was playing with a hernia last season. How that affected his performances, I guess we will tell in a few game weeks time. But if you guys want to take a punt, an alternative to a kind of Harry Kane, I like him at his price point, and you can still be quite flexible if you want to downgrade him. A play that you could potentially downgrade him to is going to be Raheem Sterling at just below 4%. Now similar to kind of the story with Heung-min Son, had a very bad season last season as did Chelsea, and therefore has had a massive price drop. But over the previous seasons, generally has been a top performer, and that's why I still like Raheem Sterling at 7.0 million. Now because Chelsea start off against Liverpool, you might give yourself 1 or 2 game weeks to assess how they're setting up, but if he is starting in preseason, I think he should be pretty nailed. But as with all these other clubs, we're going to see in preseason how they set up. Want to see where Pochettino plays him. Then the final option might be my favorite differential out of all of these. It's going to be Solly March from Brighton. The reason I'm saying this is that if you go look at Matoma's ownership, about 33% owned, where Solly March is owned by 3.3%. So Solly March is 10 times less owned than his Japanese colleague, and if you guys are kind of stats backed, you know that Solly March outperforms him. So if you want to go for a cheeky alternative to a current template pick, I think that Solly March could be the one to go for. Now, there's also Enciso at a cheaper price point at 5.5 million. He's also quite a differential, but I do prefer Solly March if you want to go there. Now we will be seeing where João Pedro, the new signing for Brighton, does set up, but I do think Solly March should be nailed in that starting 11. But as with the defenders, are there any midfielders that I have missed out on? Who's your cheeky punt for Game Week 1? Now finally going to the forward department, and we're a little bit strained in terms of the forwards, just because kind of it's a very template forward section this season. It's Erling Haaland, Gabriel Jesus, then there's a few alternatives. So my forwards are quite highly owned, and I can't really suggest going for them, but I do think your eye should be on them, because throughout this season we're definitely going to include them. So for example, the first player, Ollie Watkins, at just below 15%, 14.3% to be more precise. He's just a great FPL asset at that striker position. Yes, he might not finish every chance, but under Emre, Aston Villa were playing super well, and I think he's actually underrated. So if you guys are looking for an alternative to Gabriel Jesus, want a little bit of a differential, Ollie Watkins could be your man. Next up we have Callum Wilson, and he's owned by 10% of people. Now if you want some kind of hype for Callum Wilson, go look at his points per 90 minutes of last season, as he was simply outstanding. Especially towards the end of the season, he was racking up those goals and assists, and I was one of the players that actually owned Isaac over him. So like Fabian Schär has a tough start to the season, but I do prefer the Newcastle attack to the defense over this tough run. But just see if Callum Wilson is still starting instead of Isaac up front, because then he could be absolute FPL gold. Then the final option has scored his first goal of preseason in the first Liverpool game, so there could be quite a lot of hype behind him come Game Week 1. It's going to be Darwin Núñez at 7.2%, but like Luis Diaz, quite hard to predict how Jurgen Klopp's going to set up. But if you guys do want to take a punt, go for someone out there. Darwin Núñez will always get minutes, even if it's only going to be when he's subbed on. But if you guys do look at the stats, Darwin Núñez always gets chances, and his XG per 90 is simply outstanding. So comment down below, are you guys going for any of the front three? Darwin Núñez is probably the most obvious one, but I can understand if you guys want to hold off for a few game weeks. But as mentioned, this draft you guys can afford with 3.5 million left in the bank. Doubt anyone's going to go for it, but if you want to look at one or two options, there's definitely a few underrated gems that I think are going under the radar. If any of these players are in your team, comment them down below, or as mentioned, who is your favorite differential going to game week 1? But this is basically a wrap of the video, guys. Hope you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like if you did and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I'll be seeing you guys for loads of content coming up, and as mentioned, my updated draft video is dropping tomorrow, so make sure those bell notifications are turned on. But I'm going to sign off. This has been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.